Sorry, I thought that was done for me. It just shed light on my credibility that I couldn't even turn on the mic thing, didn't it? So let me say it just a little louder in case you didn't hear me. I like this place because I like the people that make this place what it is. And in case you're wondering, I want you to know that in my opinion, you made a good decision the day you made a decision to come to this place to study. Because you've made yourself a part of a community of people that are wise, godly people. And that's always a smart move. I hope you came here because you want to change the world. Because I'm here to tell you this, the world needs changing. It needs a God-sized change, and for some reason, God has decided to make God-sized changes through his people. Not his people in their own power, but he's decided to empower his people to make the kind of difference in the world that only he, through his people, can make. The world could use it because all of us, including the people of God, are so conditioned by the culture we live and breathe and move in that it's hard to keep stuff straight. So even Christians sometimes struggle to allow their values to be shaped primarily by the pages of Scripture and not an MSN homepage. We struggle to keep straight what it means to transform culture rather than simply be absorbed and assimilated into culture. But the thing is, that's always been true. It's always been a challenge. And God, in his faithfulness to himself, and in his covenant faithfulness to his covenant people, always raises up people who will swim against the current, who will stand against the wind, and through whom he makes a difference for his sake. And sometimes you can come along at just the right time and have influence beyond your generation by creating a legacy where not only in your own lifetime, but through your descendants, the world is changed through your decisions. And I don't know how you came to this place, but as a result of your time in this place, if you'll let God get a hold of you, he can make a difference beyond your awareness and beyond your lifetime. The sermon hasn't even started yet, but it all relates to the sermon, which will eventually be from the book of Ruth. But to start off, we're going to talk about David. You may have heard of David before. David was Israel's greatest king, and his legacy extended so long and so far that it is on Israel's national flag to this day. David had a big enough influence to show up in the Summer Olympics, which is bigger than most people of his era. So David had to learn some things about leadership to end up Israel's greatest king. And God had to teach those to him somehow. And among the ways God taught David how to be a leadership influence for his sake was through stories of family legacy. And if you want to know what I came to you to say today in a sentence, it would be this. You want to make a God-sized difference for God's sake that's bigger than your own lifetime. It requires more than mere credentials. It requires character. Leave here with a degree, but leave here with more than just a degree. If you leave here just with skills, you're so dangerous they ought to wrap you in caution tape. but credentials and competencies cloaked in character. Man, no piece of paper can capture that, and the devil himself can't stand against it. So David learned a little bit about that, the way we all do, which is through once upon a times. And the kind of character I'd really like to talk about today comes from what may be the most significant Hebrew word in the entire Hebrew Bible. Now, there are a lot of important words. It's sort of hard to argue against Yahweh. That's sort of an important word. But when it comes to how God reveals himself in action and how he compels his people to reflect his own nature and character, there is a word in the Hebrew Bible that is so big, no single word can define it. It is so big, no paragraph can define it. It is so big, no human can perfectly embody it. It is a word so big that only God can define it. And it is the word, got to work up a little spit here, chesed. It is a word for the covenant faithfulness of God. And from an Old Testament perspective, if you want to understand how you respond to God and love for God and neighbor, you better work up a little spit. Because it sounds an awful lot like chesed. And David had to learn that, and he learned it through once upon a time. You know anything about how, for those of you who were blessed with the opportunity to grow up in homes where you had a close connection to both your parents, you know anything about how your parents got together? That's kind of special when you know a little bit of the family story. Now, how many of you know a little bit about how your grandparents got together? Now, see, that's a lot more rare. But how about the story of how your great-grandparents got together? Now, that's another thing entirely. But sometimes, if you can go back that far, you can get a family legacy that can help you live out your own lifetime and extend that legacy beyond. That brings us to the book of Ruth. Book of Ruth unfolds, the story of Ruth unfolds in the period of time known at the beginning of the story and to most of us as the period of the Judges. You remember that time in Israel? Have you learned about that time in Israel's history? Man, it's just ugly to the bone. Man, what a horrible period overall. I mean, it's really rough. And the reason it's so rough is because of that phrase that is repeated twice, once in chapter 17, once in chapter 21, that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Everybody just kind of sized up their world and thought, yep, this looks good to me. Believe we'll head this way. Boy, did that turn out poorly. Because the entire period of Judges portrays Israel as so saturated by the influence of the surrounding Canaanite culture that you couldn't tell a Canaanite from an Israelite. Even the judges who are servants of God exercise their efforts to deliver God's people in ways that look like Canaanites. Even some of the ways God in his grace works to deliver his people are through people who are acting like Canaanites, out-Canaaniting the Canaanites. Well, it says a lot about the grace of God. That even faithful people who show up in Hebrews 11, are orienting themselves in some way toward God, are servants of God, are in some way faithful instruments of God, and yet don't always look all that much like God. But in case you start to think to yourself, man, just everyone in Judges must have been a mess. The story of Ruth is presented as a refreshing contrast. Yeah, in general, even Israel is a mess because people are doing what seems right in their own eyes. But God always has a group of faithful people. Sometimes they're out on the margins, sometimes they're working behind the scenes, but there are always faithful people. And that's the story of Ruth. As the story begins, the camera sort of, pans in on a family. You have a man and a woman. His name is Elimelech. Her name is Naomi. They have 2 boys. And they have just handed over the deed to their family property. Now, if you've read enough of the Old Testament, you know when the year of Jubilee rolls around, they're supposed to get it back. But it's a period of Judges, and everybody's doing what seems right in their own eyes. So that's kind of looking a little shaky. They've just had to sell their family property because you can't eat dirt. There's a famine in the land. And if you've read the book of Deuteronomy, you know the Judges, this era, is one in which it should not be surprising to see a famine, because when a previous generation of Israelites, the second generation to leave the land, snuggled right up against this generation, they had pledged covenant fidelity to God. They pledged chesed to the God who was showing it to them. And they pronounced on themselves the very blessings God had promised if they were faithful. And pronounced curses on themselves if they were unfaithful, including famine on themselves and their descendants. So everything that happens after Deuteronomy, if you read there's a famine in the land, boy, you better look beyond the clouds, because those are to be theologically interpreted. People are going astray, and God is expressing his loving discipline in an effort to nudge them back home. Speaking of home, this couple's about to leave it. They head off to the land of the Moabites, who are related but ain't exactly orthodox. Because they've heard there's food there. And sometimes when you're desperate, you'll pack up the old covered wagon in search of a square meal. Off they go. And while they're there, the story moves. All films play with time to emphasize what's most important. And we move quickly through this phase. Off they move off through tears, they go to Moab. Those 2 boys, they grow up. They go to Moabite square dances and socials and, that kind of thing. Meet them a couple of Moabite hotties. And marry they do. Now, there's no use looking around to see how they're painting the nursery. They don't have any kids. But eventually, man, it's a rough world. Bad things happen. Elimelech dies. 2 sons die. And you've got a woman who's got a lot of reason to wear black. And she's got company. Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law. Orpah, after whom Oprah Winfrey was named. A little bit of misspelling there. But that's for whom she's named. And Ruth. Naomi's bonded to these women. They're family. You got to work up a little spit if you're going to describe their connectedness. Because it just looks an awful lot like chesed. They're bonded together, and because she cares so much for them, she says to them, look, don't hang around with me. You know, I'm an old woman. I'm only going to drag you down. Go back home and find yourself a new husband. Join the band, the husband. You've got to have a way. You've got to have a way to make it through this world. You're vulnerable. Go back home. And through tears, one of her daughters-in-law does, but not Ruth. Nope, in one of those moments it says, I am bonded to you in a way too deep for words. She just kind of goes, Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your people will be my people. And your God will be my God. Because to go back home in that world was probably for her to switch allegiances divine. I will die where you die. Bury me there. That's a chesed kind of statement. And so, they head back to the little town from which they had departed once upon a time. Naomi, that is. A little town called Bethlehem. That reminds me, by the way, if you want to live out that kind of bonded loyalty, one like as big as God himself. I'll tell you what that requires. It requires, if I can just put a label on it, it requires resilient loyalty. That's what chesed looks like. It's not just a lofty idea. It means you are relentlessly loyal. And the harder times get, the more loyal you are. You dig down, you dig deep, you dig in your heels, and you are immovable. Nothing will test that like tough times. And in a world where everyone else is doing what it seems right in their own eyes, when times get tough, you'll either fight the wrong way or you will hightail it out of town. They hightail it out of town, but they hightail it out of town together. That's what it means to demonstrate godlike chesed. So they have a commercial break to, sell siding and microwave popcorn. Scene 2 unfolds in Bethlehem. They return home, and it's a good time of year to return back to a little town called Bethlehem, because it's the beginning of the barley harvest, and they'd heard even in Moab they'd had a bounty crop. Now, the beginning of barley harvest, man, that's just the time to come around, because that's the first harvest of the year. So there are harvests yet to come, and if you're a little hungry, this is just the time to be moving back home. However, which fields you approach, and therefore which people you approach, has a lot to do with how your stay in Bethlehem is going to go. Naomi knows that. She's got a little time to size this up. Back they get, and Naomi has, and she knows she has, a relative by the name of Boaz. Man, nobody names their kid Boaz. It's kind of too bad. We name our kids after sports heroes. Oh, sorry, I know it's Spirit Week. I shouldn't have said that. We don't name our kids after virtuous people. How many Prudences are there in the world anymore? That's a name for a virtue. We take our heroes from all sorts of other places. Maybe we need more Boazes out there. What's your name? Boaz. How on earth did you get that name? I hope you'll be able to see it in my life every day. Because as the story unfolds, man, it's beautiful. It's a God-shaped beautiful. Because Ruth goes out, she's the younger one. She's going to go out and do the gleaning. That's allowable according to the law, and everybody knows it, but not everybody lives it out when they're doing what seems right in their own eyes. So what field she goes to is going to determine how generous the workers in that field are, how generous the boss of those workers is, and how, as a woman, she is going to be treated in an environment that has the potential either to be protective or to be threatening. And man, does she make a good choice. It is almost like the Lord is with her, which is exactly what Boaz says to his workers in the text. He's a good dude. Even his employees like him. It's like working for Dr. Voorhees. Man, everybody just blessing each other in the Lord. Oh, Lord bless you. Lord bless you. No, Lord bless you. They just all love each other. They all get along. It's just like Chesed is right there in the field with them. They're bonded together. Man, agriculture's tough in this world. It's hard work. Somebody that knows metalworking better than you can just swoop in and steal everything. People are greedy and selfish. There's only so much barley to go around. But man, a godly man can make a difference in a situation like that. And so Boaz and Ruth meet each other, and all kinds of things happen. They say lots of nice, godly things to one another. He makes sure that she has both the opportunity to secure food and is able to do so in a way that is not threatening, is not abusive, is not harmful. And they say all sorts of nice things to one another, about one another, and even about God, who is at work in this story, sheltering a righteous woman through, in part, the kind efforts of a righteous, godly man. Now, all sorts of other stuff happens. But she goes back with lots of barley. Naomi knows it's been a good day. And I'm reminded of something here. Chesed. Well, it does require resilient loyalty. Also involves selfless generosity. It's just lavish. Not selfish. It's not hoarding. It's selfless. It's caring. It's warm. It's not, law says I got to let you have a few little grains of barley here. It's warm. It's tender. It's caring. It's lavish. And it's generous. So again, we pause to buy Medicare supplements, Fritos, and on we move to scene 3, which happens in the threshing floor. It's at night, gentler winds up on high, so the wind can kind of blow across, separate the grain from the not grain. Just a place for a romance novel, don't you think? Man, we're a long way from your prom, aren't we? So, here we go. We're in the barley field, and man, this is just, it's such an amazing moment. Because here, there's been all this stuff along the way. I mean, famine is threatened. We've got grieving people who are vulnerable and desperate. They come back home. You got to pick the right field. She ends up in the right field. They've got some barley. But now, we got to solve this in a long-term kind of way. And man, something radical's about to go down here. Man, this is like hardcore countercultural. Got to really believe in Jesus and pray this one up before you go there. Because Naomi, who cares? Man, she cares more about Ruth than she cares about herself. And she's so concerned to see Ruth taken care of long term. So she gets that mother-in-law thing going. It works up a plan. All right, darling, here's what we're going to do. We're going to set you up with Boaz. Now go ahead, dress up. But Naomi, I am adorned in godliness. That's good. Take a bath too. Because, that's good too. So she cleans up and she heads for the threshing floor. Now she's not heading there at noon. I mean, the clock's, lining up 12 and 12, but it ain't noon. That's a risky move. Because what she's done is she prepares to go out and meet Boaz, who doesn't know she's coming. She's sort of adorning herself in a way that if you're heading to the barley fields at midnight and you prettied up, what's happening there is either a very unfortunate vocational choice or a very unfortunate recreational activity. Unless, of course, you are a person who's defined by chesed. Out she goes. It looks a little risky. She does this strange little thing. Here's Boaz, he's been, working all day, have a little food, have a little libation, get a good night's rest. There he is snoozing away. And along she comes and she uncovers his feet, just a little bit of his leg. Don't take that too far. Sometimes commentators take that too far. There's no need to take that too far. And lays down beside him, kind of at his feet. That's a good place for a commercial break. Make you wonder what's going to happen when he wakes up. He kind of stirs around a little bit. Behold, here is Ruth. And she pretty much says, it'd be a pretty good idea to marry me. And he thinks to himself, you are a virtuous woman. Those are hard to find, not to mention find at your feet at their own initiative. And this harvest, 6-7 weeks, they've had a little bit of opportunity to be around each other. He thinks, man, that's not a bad idea, now that you mention it. But he's a noble man. And he knows that there is a closer relative who actually has the responsibility to take care of her. In a moment like that, a lesser man, one who's just sort of doing what seems right in his own eyes, might just kind of say, baby, nobody else is following the law anyhow. Let's get together. Instead, he does a very self-disciplined and virtuous thing. He says, there is a closer kinsman redeemer than I. Let's see what he says. That's pretty selfless when deep down, out of compassion, you want to take care of someone. And you know you have a commitment to a law bigger than your own wisdom. And so you choose to follow the course, even when your own heart and mind aren't sure how that's going to go. Man, I wish I could say that to every dating Bible college couple out there. Since I can't, I'll just mention it to you. But man, that's what chesed looks like. God-sized chesed, so deeply bonded, not only between people, but between people and God. It's like triangular there. That even when you want to do stuff that seems really noble to you, you trust the processes of God beyond your own preferences. That leads to chapter 4. And now we're at the city gates. I mean, again, we sold siding and, Medicare supplements there for the break. But now, scene 4 happens at city gates, which is the place you gather to take care of the business of the town. Remember that kinsman redeemer potential guy who's more closely related and therefore has the primary responsibility? He's also a sermon on chesed. And the sermon is, don't be like him. Because what happens is, even though he has the responsibility to care for Ruth, here's how the story basically goes down. I know we're out of time, so here's how the story basically goes down. It's like, hey, you know what? We've got an opportunity here for you to take some family land back under your own care. Awesome, I'll do it. A woman comes with it. Oops, won't do it. I'm interested in the prerogatives. I'm just not interested in any responsibilities. Therefore, I willingly hand over my rights. Here's, take my sandal. I'm happy to be known as the unsandaled one. Just don't burden me down. So he hands over the rights, which means Boaz is free to marry Ruth. And soon, a child is born. And that boy is David's grandpa. And the story is designed to say, you know what? Here's who we are as a people. We are a people defined by chesed. It's all we have. All we have is God and one another. That's all we got. But that's lavish and far beyond what we need. Now, you may recall David struggled a little to perfectly live out the family legacy. There were times when David's life is characterized by resilient loyalty and by lavish, warm generosity and by trusting God and God's ways, even when it didn't immediately make sense to him. But there's also times he kind of blew it. That's why he and we needed one who came later in the line of David. Son of David, Son of God, to restore David's throne in a forever kind of way, living in perfect covenant faithfulness to God and the embodiment of God's perfect covenant faithfulness to his people. Nothing in the surrounding Roman world could make sense of that. Nothing on the inside Jewish world seemed to be able to correctly process that. And in spite of every obstacle that appeared to stand in the way, God, in a way only God could do, said, because of my commitment to you, in spite of you, and because of you, I will demonstrate covenant faithfulness to you and demonstrate to you how to demonstrate covenant faithfulness to one another. And so Jesus made it possible for us to live under and to live out chesed. And when you look around you and everyone's doing what seems right in their own eyes, and it's hard for you to even keep straight how to live for God in a crazy culture, remember this. His legacy extends far beyond us and far beyond our moment in history, because it culminates in a new heaven and a new earth, in a place where everything outside is outside forever. And in the words of Revelation 21, God says, I will be your God, and you will be my people. And you can throw away your calendar and your wristwatch, because none of that matters anymore. And you can throw away your coping strategies, because none of that matters anymore. All that endures is God and us and chesed. May we live faithfully this day in anticipation of that day. Lord God, may our lives declare the power and beauty of your covenant faithfulness. May you be blessed. May we as your people be blessed. And may a watching world be blessed as a result, for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.